Okay, I caught the little hellion, so I'm grabbing a quick video while I got him. This is Mr. Benjamin Banks, and if the video starts waving wildly, it's because he's down at the bottom going crazy. All right. Our eye is doing much better. We are very healthy, and if you'll notice, nobody is around me because he has worn everybody out and they are all desperately trying to get some sleep. So anyway, it's been very exciting around here. Okay, welcome to chapter 25, True History. So if we remember last time, we had made it through the stacks and piles, and Biddy had been giving out information in the form of advice to everybody, and basically just, listening to where they were coming from and what their goals were in life, and then from his perspective as a historian and as a collector of stories, what value could he project to them from all the other people that he had heard. So I hope you guys found that very interesting. It will definitely factor in the future as life changes start to happen for Sandy and the rest of the crew. So very exciting. Hopefully that'll come down good. So where we left off on the last chapter was we were going to start talking about the history of runes and charms, which of course Biddy was very excited to talk about. Okay, just on another little side note, as a author, you read so much of the advice that's out there, and they say, create your backstory and just have it in your head, but you never really use it, and you certainly don't start with it when you're coming out of the gate. So this is very exciting for me. Like, I have created this whole world, and it's just very exciting to be able to go back and kind of tell you some of the history of the way I've created it, and I know so many of you that follow me on YouTube get very excited with the theories and how's magic and where's it growing and where's it going. And so for those of you who enjoy the theory side and the history side, this is your chapter. This is the chapter where a lot is going to be told. I can't wait to hear all the comments, and I hope it will fill in some of the missing pieces for you, and I also hope that it will very much give you all kinds of ideas of what you can do and where we can go from here. Okay, chapter 25, True History. The rain chose that moment to start coming down a bit harder. It felt like we were huddled around a campfire, telling ghost stories that began with, "It was a dark and stormy night." The rain had the added effect of making it harder to hear Biddy, so I paused the tale, and we all got up and moved the couch and cushions closer to him. As we settled back down again, the assistant coat rack came out and handed out cookies to go with our endless tea. Bermuda jumped out of his box and came to sit on my lap. His comfortable weight felt nice as I ran my fingers through his soft fur. Once we were huddled up, it felt like the perfect space to share stories and learn about the mysteries of the universe. Biddy's commanding voice filled the room as he began. There are many ways to start talking about history, and that makes sense as there are many beginnings. If you ask a modern mage about our history, they will start with the two brothers and the forming of the bank. It's as if nothing existed before that moment. And it does make sense for most historians, for most histories to begin there, as that is the start of our modern era. That is only one possible beginning of many, though, and our tale starts many years before that. I can tell you this history is as true as it is possible to know in modern times. I collected tales from the time from before the bank for years. Many times I'd hear tales from an old mage who told me what his teacher's teacher had told him. Third-hand reports are not reliable, but after collecting a lot of them, a basic picture of life before began to emerge. Then one day a very old mage happened my way. His language was so old I barely understood it, even with the translator. Most people thought he was crazy, as there was no way he could be that old. He told me he had to redo his core 3 times, whatever that means. And he just lost track of time. Apparently he'd gone deep underground to harvest mana directly from the earth, and had stayed down there for at least a couple thousand years. Now he was back among his fellow humans, and everything had changed. He didn't have any of the basic skills to be part of this society, so I hosted him for a while and taught him what he needed to know. In exchange, he told me stories about his youth, as well as stories from his teacher and his teacher's teacher. In the end, he thanked me for our time together, but this life was too far removed from what he was comfortable with. He decided to go underground again, and I haven't heard from him since. Maybe one day we'll meet up again. Until then, he helped me separate fact from myth from the stories I'd heard, and that is what I'm passing on to you today. Thunder boomed, and Biddy paused for a moment. Magic existed long before humans walked the earth, and magic will exist long after we pass on and some other sentient life form grows and takes our place. So when humans first became supernatural, we were not the dominant magical species of the world. There really weren't that many of us, so I've termed this the age of the Nomad. We learned from the magic of trees, animals, and other sentient species that are not around today. Mundane humans hadn't settled down together, much less supernaturals, and there are almost no stories from this period of time. Of course, eventually, humans did settle down. We learned how to farm the land and how to raise animals for food. Supernaturals followed this trend also, and we have the start of our first civilization. Naturals were the dominant mage form for obvious reasons. Naturals were the dominant, supernatural. Naturals, with their focus on physical abilities, could survive a lot easier. They could hunt better, resist disease easier, farm the land without tiring, and defend themselves better. The world they lived in was uncivilized and rough, so those that were physically powerful had a much easier time. In contrast, mages ran out of power quickly and took too long to actually create any effect on the world. They were terrible at hunting, terrible at working the land, and terrible at defending themselves. These early settlements were basically made up of mages looking for safety and support from their natural leaders. Runes had not been found yet, so everything ran off of personal power, affinity, and raw ability. I call this Age of the Farmer. These early supernaturals had a better life than their mundane counterparts, but not by much. Then one day the first Rune Master was born. Not much is known about him other than the fact that he figured out how to use runes in his magic. Because of that, he quickly gained a lot of power, and that led to his downfall. Even with runes, he was still a young mage, and according to one account I heard, he was tricked and killed. He had used runes for the first time, though, and that opened up the supernatural world to the possibility that there was other ways of gaining power. Rune Masters are exceptionally rare. The next one wasn't born until humanity was much more settled. Everyone wanted to own her, and this Rune Master was a woman, and I suspect this led to her downfall as much as the grab for power. Everyone wanted to own her and own her knowledge of runes. In the end, she was killed, so the enemy of the time couldn't grow more powerful. The third Rune Master, in a twist of fate, was born not long after that and almost in the same area. This time he apprenticed himself to a powerful mentor. Exciting. And the mentor did something very unexpected. He gave away the runes for free. He carved the runes into stones and sent them to everyone he knew. Then he moved far away and did it again. His enemies couldn't catch him, and when they did, he bribed them with rune stones instead of fighting. Eventually, everyone had rune stones, and the focus shifted to how to use them, rather than finding them in the first place. Thus began the era of the rune. Humans were much more densely populated during this time, and so were the supernatural settlements. So territory and goods started to become a big thing. Supernaturals could do so much more with runes, and their standard of living rose dramatically. Supernaturals started wanting what other supernaturals had, so battles became a big thing. It was these battles that drove the next series of innovations. Mages and naturals would use their magic to inscribe the rune in the air, like they were going to cast it somehow, and make it do what they wanted. Mages and naturals could use their magic to inscribe the rune in the air, and then they could cast through it somehow, and make it do what they wanted. As you can imagine, in a battle situation, this was very slow and prone to errors. Also, it was hard to remember a bunch of runes and get them right. Something needed to change, and it did. Someone figured out how to burn a rune into a stone and make it magically active. It wasn't just a copy of the rune, it was an actual magical outline, ready to cast through, just like they'd written it in the air. This was a huge upgrade, and it seemed like two schools figured it out at the same time. They both became very successful until this new way became common knowledge. It seemed like the stones only worked for the original caster, so everyone got very good at making their own. This became the golden age of runes, as rune and rune variations were passed around like candy. This is also the time when naturals became their strongest. They figured out how to internalize the runes and use them to massively augment their powers. This allowed them to become demigods or even gods. As a side note, this is probably where the legends like Zeus, Hercules, and Medusa came from. Biddy paused to give MM and GM a pointed look to make sure they were listening. They were, and so was I. We don't know how they did it, and most people have forgotten that it can even be done. Just know that tattoos don't seem to work. This has already been tried in a variety of forms. It also isn't as simple as taking a stone rune and swallowing it, or inserting it under your skin. In the first case, it just comes out your ass. And in the second case, it's almost the same as carrying it around in your pocket. One story I've heard said it had something to do with their aura, but what they actually did to it is unknown. Don't get fixated on this idea either, as it only shows up in one account and I could never corroborate it. The next invention was the start of the mage technology we have today. A mage learned how to save his power into a rock. Back then, one of the big determiners of a battle winner was who could last the longer with magic. By being able to store power, a mage could now field a lot more magic in a battle and thereby win the fight. Soon, all the mages figured this out, but naturals didn't. Their bodies were their batteries. Why would they need anything else? This is like Penny, my analytical side chimed in. You went overboard and made her aware, but it's the same concept. So now we have rocks that held power and rocks that held active runes. Now, when mages fought, they would pull power from a power stone and then cast it through a rune rock. That took time, and speed is everything when you're fighting, so the next advancement only made common sense. Someone figured out how to put a battery and a rune together. It wasn't as flexible as having separate runes and power sources, but the faster mages started winning battles, and it wasn't long before everybody was doing it. This is fascinating stuff, my analytical side enthused. This is the level you're working at now. Your flashers and T contain the power and the rune. Together they do an excellent job making light and healing you. Quick, ask Biddy about the advantages to doing this way. He's a historian, so he won't be able to resist giving you a good answer. I quickly raised my hand and Biddy paused. He didn't look upset, but he didn't look happy either. Your tale is so intriguing, I said, and this is the era I'm especially interested in. I'm sure you're going to move on to how modern charms are formed, but I wanted to ask you a quick question while we're here. You know the stories of what was possible then compared to what is possible now. So what advantage did those mages have back then using rune stones and power stones over how we do things currently? Biddy's eyes twinkled and he got a big smile on his face. Well, someone is listening. I'm glad you find the era of runes interesting. I must admit, it is a huge focus of mine, and I spent most of my time searching out stories from that period. I was going to do a summary at the end, but this might be an even better time. He sipped his tea and gathered his thoughts. The big difference between rune stones and modern charms is how personal they are. Rune stones were burned by the mage and only used by them. So the mage knew exactly what the rune was and what it was supposed to do. The magic used in making the rune was very personal, and the magic that was cast through it was the mage's own magic. This allowed the mages at that time to do fantastical things with their power. They were only limited by their imagination, their capacity, and their flow. Modern charms, on the other hand, are very impersonal, but they allow for a much wider range of application. Take those teacups you're using right now. I don't know exactly how the charm is structured to keep the tea full and the temperature consistent. I just know how it works. I don't even power them directly. Instead, I have a charging station, and I pay the bank whatever it needs to keep them full of power and ready for my guests. I've thought about this a lot, but I believe that if a modern battle mage met a battle mage from the rune era, they would get their ass handed to them. Mages in the era of runes ruthlessly trained their minds and their powers to the highest degree. They had only themselves to rely on, so they became the best they could possibly be. On the other hand, a modern mage has a much better standard of living. I could not run the shop without my shop friends. Because of them, I can catalog and sell a vast array of items. I don't even move my shop anymore. This is all my own mini realm, and I just connect it to booths at whatever tournament or fair I want to attend. Because of that, I can attend more than one event at a time. I just make sure the entrances land in different starter rooms. For my age, I'm only a moderately powerful mage, but because of charms, I can run a large shop which affords me a very good income. And because of that income, I live like a king compared to the mages of old. I have all the power I want, and it allows me the luxury of spending my time the way I prefer. He nodded at Sandy. I'm spending it talking with you wonderful people about history. So in a way, I'm having an adventure right now. He nodded at MM, and he looked back at me. Does this answer your question for the moment? I could talk about the differences all day, but I had the rest of history to cover. Yes, thank you, I said politely. You've explained it beautifully. This is a lot to unpack, my analytical side spoke up again. There are so many different thoughts that can come from this. The biggest one is that I think you should work on becoming a Rune Master rather than a Charm Master. Agreed, I said, although I still think I can make charms. Not just awake charms like Penny, but real charms like Sandy's Force Charm. When we get back to Louisville, we're going to have to do some experimenting and figure this out. This is going to be fun. Now, where was I? Biddy mused. Ah, yes, I was at the point where they were putting rune stones and power stones together. Those mages won their fights, so that ended up becoming the standard way of doing things. All that changed one day when a very powerful mage wanted to help out her lover, who was a very weak mage. According to the tale, her lover was a beautiful young man who was great in bed but terrible at magic. He could barely light a candle or do any of the normal things a mage should be able to do. To make up for his lack of talent in that area, and because of his rather large talent in other areas, Biddy gave a rather naughty chuckle. She ended up making him a charm with a power source and figured out how to fill it with ambient magic. This changed everything. You have to understand, mages could get challenged at any time, so getting low on their magic was never something you wanted to have happen. Mages were always careful with their rune usage because they used their own personal power. Once they found out how to use ambient power, then that opened up a whole other world of what was possible. The teachers also loved it because they could give these new charms to their students and make them do all the charging circles to fill them up. The only drawback was the ambient magic didn't respond as well to the mage's commands. That forced the next breakthrough, which was applying constraints, triggers, and all the logical connections used in modern charms today. The era of charms started before the bank, but that is the greatest testament to what is possible with modern magic. In some ways, modern charms are a lot like those new cell phones the mundanes have. Most of them don't know how it really works, but they know how to use it, and that is what we have today. I don't know exactly how my shop friends work, but I know how to use them. Biddy sat back and regarded us silently. I looked at my crew, and they looked like they had ideas and possibilities swirling through their heads. I knew I certainly did. I was going to be chewing over the story for years to come, looking for new ideas to try. "Thank you very much for your knowledge," I said. "You've given us all a lot to think about." I settled deeper into the red sofa and took a sip of tea myself. Now, I believe it's time for me to tell my story. And that is what I did. I told him as much as I could, without mentioning Mother Creation or Father Alrune. I also didn't mention Penny, the Flying Miners, or the Ass Blaster 2000s. I just made it seem like I did everything manually with my magic. I hoped he would assume that anything missing was because of the intervention of the cosmic powers. Biddy asked questions, but they were more from a what happened story perspective rather than a how did you do it technical perspective. He was very fascinated with my theory about how the Mage of long ago had compressed the Centaur's aura and how it gradually started expanding more today. While I was talking, I realized something. Biddy had ended his talk too soon. As soon as it seemed like he was satisfied with my story, I got him back on track with the history of runes again. We've had a nice break from the history of runes, and I hope you are happy with my story. However, I'd like to get back to runes and how they fared in the modern age. I'm sure as a historian, this might seem too current for your interests, but I've only been in the supernatural world for a few months now. I've only heard a little bit about the bank and its origin while at the gathering. Before that, I didn't even know the bank existed. As you've said, there are a lot of stories out there, and I would bet that most of them are centered on gaining power and making charms. Your version of modern history would provide a much needed context of how modern runes and charms have changed over time. I stopped and gave him my best puppy-eyed look. I knew I was laying on the flattery a bit thick, but it was all true. Biddy could probably give me a better overview of charms than anyone else. It only made sense to ask. Biddy gave me a shrewd look like he knew what he was up to, but he couldn't resist talking about history, so he picked up where he'd left off. "You are right. There is still a lot to say, even though we've reached the modern era. I suppose I can't talk about what we have today without first talking about the two brothers, John and Ezra. There are stories about them having two competing schools and trading pearls and all that. As far as I can tell, that is nonsense. They were competing, but not against each other. I think the real version of the story was that they each had certain talents and they worked very well together. John was both a ruthless fighter and a canny diplomat. He was an excellent judge of character, and he had a knack for getting supernaturals to do what he wanted. When that didn't work, he fought them. From the tales I've heard, he was badly injured more than once, but he never lost a fight. Balancing out the fighter was his brother Ezra, the genius. Logical connections for charms were just getting started, and most of them hadn't been discovered yet. Ezra took this new area of learning and expanded it massively. He was the Einstein of his day. He had a knack for seeing what was missing, creating it, and then using that connection in new and unexpected ways. There was a third member of their family, and she is almost never mentioned in the stories. They had a sister, Ruth, and I'm pretty sure she was one of the fabled Rune Masters. Apparently she was very shy and reserved, and she let her brothers take all the glory. Between the three of them, they made the perfect team. Ruth could see runes, and so provided the basis for their magic. Ezra put the runes and logical connections together to make the charms, and John used the charms to spread their influence far and wide. What are the odds of 3 siblings becoming a perfect team like this? My analytical side mused. This sounds like the All-Rune was working some of his probabilities again. I agreed. That did sound suspicious, but Biddy was still talking, so I focused in again. The advancements they made were massive and changed the supernatural world as we know it. Now we have a standard unit of currency, the pearl, and mages can either spend it or use it to refill their magic. We have the bank, which provides just about everything a modern mage needs. We have a robust system of charms that can do everything from heat an oven to help you fly. In a short period of time, naturals were out and mages were in. Everyone wanted the magical flexibility that mages had. Naturals focused a lot less on their abilities and started using charms just like everyone else. The old naturals either died out or ascended, and soon the knowledge of how to be a powerful natural was lost. For a couple hundred years, the brothers and their hidden sister remained supreme. The bank and pearls became the basis for everything. Then their family stepped back from public life and focused on making the bank a lot more than just a place for money. The bank is still evolving today, although no one knows if Ezra and Ruth are behind it or not. Humanity, and by extension the supernatural world, was becoming a lot more populous. Ezra wasn't the only genius, and Ruth wasn't the only Rune Master. And soon collections started forming. This is when someone figured out how to make a group of useful and popular charms and do it consistently. They would start a collection and train other mages how to do what they did. These collections are similar in fashion, These collections are similar to the fashion houses of today, like Prada, Gucci, or Dior. Of course, the oaths you had to swear to learn their secrets were fierce and deadly, but the financial rewards were incredible. Only the best of the best mages were invited to become part of the top collections. Soon the supernatural world was filled with entertainment, fantastical weapons, speedy travel, long-distance communication, and lots of comforts and luxuries. Of course you had to have the pearls to afford all of that. The scrambles for survival changed a bit, but it still remained. Before, you won power and influence if you, personally, were a powerful mage. Now you could win if you had enough wealth and power to hire the most powerful mage. The collections fought with each other and became even more powerful in many ways. However, the supernatural world had basically settled into a new groove. Change has been incremental, and nobody has really done anything that shifted the balance of power in a long time. I think the massive influx of new sparks may change our world yet again, but we will just have to wait and see. Biddy sat back and took a moment Biddy sat back and I took a moment to just finish absorbing everything he'd said. My goodness, he'd covered a lot. Do you know of a collection that sells golems? I asked. Biddy was a trader. Surely he'd heard stories about the different collections. None of the collections I know sell golems, Biddy said thoughtfully, but I have heard this is something the Tinker specializes in. The Tinker? I promised as Sandy flashed me a look. From what I know, he's not a collection. He's just one man. But rumor has it he's an extraordinary charmsmith, and he likes to focus on weapons. If you need something unique and powerful for personal protection, or if you need something to win a war, then he's your guy. Biddy waved his hand in the air, dismissing this line of thought. Now, enough about that. You still need to receive the force rune you've come for. I wanted to talk more about the Tinker, but Biddy was ready to move on, and I was anxious to see this rune. Now you've heard the history, I trust you understand why I can't part with the original rune stone. It's incredibly old, and I must make sure it stays as preserved as possible. Stone is a hard substance, but it can get worn down over time. In this case, the rune stone has already had a rough life, and some of the rune has worn away. I'm hopeful, though, that it will still help you and provide what you're looking for. He made a grand gesture, and the assistant stepped forward with a small stasis cube. In the cube was a small flat stone that was about the size of a quarter, and on that small stone was the force rune I was looking for. The difference between this rune and the rune Sandy had were immediately apparent. Sandy's rune looked like 4 nested L's lying on their side, with one L capping them off across the top. This was sort of like that, but it looked more like flying birds. When I was a kid, I liked to draw simple landscapes with the sun in the upper corner and a big flower with big petals. I used to draw birds flying in the air that looked like V's, except the side of the V curved down. The sides of the V curved down like the wings of a bird in flight. This rune didn't have 4 nested L's. It had 4 nested birds in flight. And the capper wasn't an upside down L. It was a wavy line like a horizon. The lines all had flow too, with the body of the birds being thickest and narrowest, and being thickest and narrowing out to a finer point on the wings. The wavy horizon line on the top was thickest in the middle and tapered on the edges. I thought this was perfect and exactly what I needed until I started looking closer. The big lines were there, but the stone was so old and had passed through so many hands that the fine detail was mostly gone. Sandy's rune had tiny straight lines that connected her L's, and there were suggestions of these lines here, but it wasn't clear how many they were and how they should flow. "Is everything okay?" Biddy asked. I guess I was looking a little bit disappointed. "This is almost everything I hoped for," I replied. "It's got the flow of the older runes, which I found is very important. Unfortunately, it's so old, it's missing some of the fine detail." "I was afraid you'd say that," Biddy said regretfully. "I've collected a few other stones like this one, but they are in much worse shape. This stone is at least 2,000 years old, and probably much older than that. So it's a miracle it's in as good a condition as it is. I've had an exact copy of this stone made out of clay and preserved in a stasis cube for you to take with you. Every tiny indent has been faithfully recreated, so hopefully you'll be able to decipher this even better with further study." "Thank you for that," I said sincerely. "Do you mind if I hold the original?" "You can hold the cube," Biddy said, "but I can't let you hold the actual stone itself. I've had it carefully cleaned and preserved. Even the natural oil of your skin can cause damage over time." "I understand," I said. "I won't take it out of the cube." I held out my hand and the assistant carefully gave me the cube. I was hoping to get a feeling for the stone, but the stasis magic in the cube kept interfering. I also wanted to be discreet with my analysis, but I gave up with that, and instead just wrapped both hands around the small cube. Then I closed my eyes and zoomed in for a closer look. As long as I didn't push too hard, my magic had soaked through the stasis spell, and I began to get a highly detailed view of the rune stone. My magic sight is incredibly detailed, and with the clues I was picking up from inside the rock, I was able to piece together how the lines should connect the birds. I also began to see there was a whole series of small markings around the edges of the main lines. Some were longer, some were shorter, and they were in all different directions. Were these part of the runes, or were they just slight scratches from normal use? I really needed to know, and this was going to be my only chance to examine the original object. I'm sure my clay replica was a good copy, but it wasn't magic like the original. Maybe I needed to give it a tiny bit of magic and wake it up? Would it even have any power at all after all this time? I shifted focus from viewing to touching, and that's when I felt my mark of the deep earth wake up and take notice. Stone? Magic? It seemed to say. It didn't have clear communication like Eggy or Penny, but it was definitely interested in what I was holding. "Yes, stone and magic," I sent back. "Map it?" I added images of watching the magic come alive and seeing the rune pop. I made it look like a topographical map, or one of those LIDAR scans where they find deep, hidden archaeological sites. I wanted to relate this to the Earth as much as possible. Map it. Its voice was getting stronger already, and orange lava capsules of deep magic started flowing out of my hand. It took a moment for its power to work through the stasis cube, but when it reached the rune stone, the results were impressive. The stone seemed to wake up, and suddenly it wasn't just an inert rock anymore. It still wasn't alive like Penny, but now it felt friendly in an earthy sort of way. It recognized me as an ally of stone, and especially a companion of magic in stone, so it wanted to help me however it could. Map it, I requested, and all the relevant bits of magic lit up in stunning detail. I saw everything the original Mage had described in it so long ago. Each line was crisp, and all the outside details were highlighted perfectly. I realized that figuring out this rune could have taken forever. Some of the outside details really were just scratches and had no bearing on the rune at all. On the other hand, I now saw details that had been completely worn away. There was no way I could have recovered them on my own. I had not only what the details were, but how often they were used. The most common areas where the magic had flowed the most were highlighted in a deep red. The least common details on the side were bright orange. Several details on the outside were all the same color, so I assumed they were all triggered together. This was totally awesome, and I quickly told the Mark of the Deep Earth and the Rune Stone just how much I appreciated their help. I didn't get any words back, but I did get a sense of satisfaction. Now I just needed to save this information. The detail was much more than I could remember, and for a moment, I panicked. I couldn't get this far, see the rune in all its glory, and then lose it again. Then I remembered my surfer dude was made up of magical sand and could mimic anything. I'd planned on giving him the force rune anyway, so now was the perfect time. "Dude, I need you," I sent out, and he surfed into view. "You can see what I see, right?" I asked. I was pretty sure all my creations could share my awareness, but in this case I needed to be sure. "Yes," he said simply. Surfer dude is a man of few words. "I'm currently highlighting a force rune from long ago. Go ahead and copy the rune. Save all the detail I'm seeing for future study." "Can I use it?" he asked. "Of course," I replied excitedly. Was he going to be able to transform it and use it like T had the healing rune? If so, that would be amazing. Use it however you want and pass it on to your surfer buddies too. His chest rippled and the force rune appeared on it like it was some sort of superhero logo. "How does that feel?" I asked. "It feels like a lot," the dude said thoughtfully. "It's fighting itself." "It's got a crap ton of options around the edge," I said. "Based on the colors I'm seeing from the runestone, only a few of them were turned on at any time. Do you think you can figure it out?" "Probably," he said simply. "It will take time." "The highest priority is getting the right options for red and the shield," I said. Then I sent him images of how I wanted the force to react in a reverse, tense on contact kind of way. "Use the force, Red," he said simply, and sent an image of Red like Obi-Wan stopping a laser blast. Oh my God, had he just made a joke? That was awesome. I gave him a mental high five. "As for yourself, you are the fastest creation I have. I'd love it if you could use the force rune to get even faster. Also, if you could carry small objects easily, like you did the cherry pit, that would be excellent. There could be a lot of potential uses for that." He nodded and shrugged, somehow conveying he would work on it and do his best without speaking at all. "Penny," I called, and she'd appeared. She'd been listening in on everything, so she'd already been studying the force rune and could recreate it if needed. "You are so awesome," I told her. She just laughed and smiled and went back to her ring. I had everything I needed, so I pulled my magic back out of the rock and the stasis field again. When the orange magic left, the rock settled back to sleep again. Originally, I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. Should I leave it a bit more aware? It had been very helpful after all. Then I thought that life inside a stasis cube in storage had to be terribly boring, so it probably was better if it went back to its low power level. It wasn't really awake like Penny anyway, so I couldn't ask it directly. Once my magic was all back again, I returned the cube to the assistant and he handed me my clay replica. I didn't need it at this point, but it was a great souvenir and I wasn't going to turn it down. "Did you get what you needed?" Biddy asked curiously. "I sure did," I replied. "Thank you very much. You've been most helpful. The history you've told me has given me a lot of ideas, and the force room is exactly what I needed. I hope to run some experiments and be able to tell you all about it the next time we meet." "I'd like that very much," Biddy said. "You seem like a resourceful type of person, so I can't wait to see what you come up with." He gestured to include Sandy and the llamas. "This goes for all of you as well. I truly hope you find a lot of value in what was said tonight. I hope your lives are better because we've met, and I hope you come back and tell me all about it." We all assured him that the evening had been enlightening, and we all hoped to meet him again. We finished up our goodbyes and headed out. Our original steampunk coat rack was still waiting outside, and it guided us through the rooms and back to our exit. I thought maybe the others would still want to look around a bit, but it seemed like we were finished and ready to head home. We exited the stack and piles, and unlike last time, we had an uneventful trip all the way back to our suite. MM and GM liked the history and remembered the advice they had been given, but what they were still excited about was their first magic working with Henry at the spinning tail. This was truly a night they would never forget. Once in our suite, we were safe for the night, so MM and GM said their goodbyes. I got a wonderful llama kiss from Mr. Muscles and a bit of a naughty kiss from his grandmother. I think she could tell I still wasn't used to it yet, so she enjoyed teasing me a bit and giving it a bit of extra lip. MM sighed and gave me a look like, "Grandma's gonna be grandma." I just laughed and wished them both safe travels and a good night. Finally, Sandy and I were alone. She yawned and gave a big stretch. "Did you really get what you needed?" she asked. "Oh yes," I said, "and the mark of the deep earth was a huge help. I was able to light up the magic in the stone, so it showed me all the options in full detail." Then I gave a big yawn too. "That is wonderful, Jason. I'm so happy for you. Normally I'd be a lot more excited than this, but I haven't fully recovered yet and I'm so tired. Give me a hug and then I'm headed back to bed before I fall over." "I feel exactly the same way," I laughed, giving her a nice goodnight hug. Then I went to bed too. Bermuda had beat me to it, and he was already hogging the pillows. I quickly got ready for bed and snuggled up with him. I planned on trading magic with both of my marks and going over the history in my mind again, but Bermuda started softly licking my nose, and before I knew it, I fell asleep. And so ends our day at the gathering. The next day is intense, so you do not want to miss it. It kicks off like you would not believe. So I'm very excited, very, very excited, and it covers several chapters and there's a lot going on. So anyway, and I'm looking forward to next week. I hope you all really enjoyed this one, and I will see you next week. Thank you.